In this video we're going to cover verifying your timing, setting up your number one tooth angle offset within the ignition options. Basically right down here we got 105 as a starting point. We're going to verify this cranking, and we're going to adjust as needed cranking. We're going to get the thing running. We're going to verify it again running. And we can fine tune that number up or down by tenths to get it just as perfect as your little heart desires. Before we get started though, it's best to come over here, go to your spark output test, enable. Of course I'm connected to the bike, ignition's turned on, and we're communicating with tunerstudio. I'm going to go ahead and turn on the coil A. Coil A, which is number 1, number 4 cylinder, the way I have it wired. Interval is 100 milliseconds. That's roughly 1200 RPMs, so it's going to pulse that with a dwell of 3 milliseconds. We're going to hit start, and the idea behind this is I have a 5th coil wired in, and we're just going to make sure that that's all working before we actually start the test. If we start the test and your test light doesn't light, well, you don't know if it's your 5th coil or the wiring in between adding the 5th coil in, or even if your test light or your timing light is working properly. So this is just a quick, simple way before you even start to know that that's all good. Okay, so I'm going to click start, and we're going to go over and check it out. All right, here you can see that we got the wiring harness plugged into the factory. That's too dark in there. The factory connector there. We also still got it wired into the number 1 coil. So when we get it running, we can actually run the engine without a misfire, without that dead cylinder. Here I have the 5th coil wired in, okay, and I have my timing light hooked up to this wire, which for visual purposes we can actually see it sparking. Can we? I can. Can you? There you go. Okay, we can actually go ahead and check it. Boom, look at that. I can see it. I hope you can in the video. Now that we've verified that's all working and we're good to go, we're going to stop that, and then we're going to disable the test. Okay, we can close this window out. Now we're going to open up the under ignition settings, ignition options, right over here to the top right. It's use table. We're going to change that to fixed. We're going to go down and burn it to the ECU. Okay. Now we're ready to. Oh well. This is actually going to say 10. I changed it to 0 so I can actually line up my timing marks. The top dead center mark with the mark on the case. Then you're going to click burn. Once you have that set to 0, click burn, and we're ready to crank the engine and watch with the timing light. Also, before we get started, we need to actually crank the engine over. We need to see it on tunerstudio. We need to see RPM come up as we're cranking it and be steady. And we do not want to see the loss sync counter rising. I mean, if you do a 1 or 2, like when you quit, that's fine. But I'm talking, we don't want to see it go up to 30, 50, or 100, whatever. We really don't even want to see 10 or 20. I mean, the more that goes up, the more lost syncs that we actually have. We really shouldn't see much of anything there. So let's go ahead and verify this. Okay, that was a good cranking pulse. Now a little bit ago I didn't have this, and real quick I'm going to show you a tip. When you wire yours in, wire in your crank sensor, it's 2 wires. You can either the plus or minus. There's a plus and there's a minus, and you have to have them matched up properly. If you have the plus with the minus and the minus with the plus, you may show RPM here, but not consistent like you just seen, and you're going to see some loss sync counter going up. And what you want to do is basically just take the wires out and flip them in the plug. Okay, and I'll show you where the plug is. You want to follow your ignition or your crank sensor wires all the way up to right underneath the bike up there. It's kind of hard to see in this video, but right here is the 2 wires. There's a black and a yellow. You want to take them, pull that connector down, and remove your air filter, whatever it takes to get to them. Remove that, pull the connector down when you get to it. Actually remove the 2 terminals from the plug, flip them around, and put them back in the other side, You know, take the yellow, the one it's in, and put it in the other side, and vice versa with the black wire. And then retest for your crank loss, your loss sync, excuse me, counter, and make sure you have consistent cranking RPM. If that's all working fine, then you're gonna have good spark out of here. If that's not working, you won't have spark out of here. So if you first hook it up and you don't have spark, most likely you have those two wires swapped. Just swap those two wires around, boom, it's ready to rock and roll. And we're going to crank it with the timing light trigger pulled. And looking through the hole, we're going to see if your time marks line up. If it's above or below your time marks, adjust your tooth 1 angle setting, up or down, adjust it one way, recheck it, see which way the needle, see which way your mark moved. If it moved further away, you need to go the opposite direction. Okay, and just get that as close as you can. You just cranking. You just want to get close enough to know that when you actually put fuel to it, that you're not going to, you know, your time is not going to be so far off that you're going to cause it to basically, you know, back kick the engine or take a chance of putting extra strain on that starter. Okay. That's the idea, to check it while we're cranking before you actually. I have the fuel system completely disabled right now. Actually, the injectors are wired in and probably trying to pulse, but I don't have the fuel pump wired in. I don't even have fuel in the bike. So at this point, the fuel pump's not running. There's no way it's getting fuel. So that's what we're doing now, is checking that first. And once we get this close and we know that it's where it, or very close to where it should be, we're safe to start the engine. We're safe to put fuel in it. Prime your fuel system up. Check for fuel leaks. Make sure that's all good, and then we're ready to do this same process with the engine running. Of course, you're probably going to have to get the engine running, and then do some quick tuning on it, just to get it where it'll idle relatively, you know, smooth, and obviously not without loading up, running rich, or trying to stall. I mean, we're going to have to get it up to operating temperature, so it's going to have to run long enough. So you may have to do a little bit of tuning to it, and hopefully with the base tune. We'll find out here shortly, but hopefully with the base tune thrown in it, it'll be close enough to get you running, get it warmed up, where we can actually do this test without you have to do any tuning. When you start over scratch with a build like I have, you have to get that tune. I mean, with a rough tune in it, or with a tune that you built from scratch, they're usually so far off that they're close enough to get it to fire off and run, but then you have to spend an hour or two getting it where you can actually get an idle out of it, a smooth idle, consistent idle, and then from that point you can go back in, and before you fine tune, you got to get your ignition all set up and get it squared away. Then you can go in and start doing your fine tuning and do your ignition tuning and all that jazz. Anyways, guys, you know, play smart. You know, when you're dealing with fuel and dealing with spark, make sure you don't have fumes around. Keep a couple, at least one. I have one fire extinguisher in here. I got one in the house, so I got two at my disposal if I need it. You know, plan ahead. Be smart. Be safe. Don't get yourself hurt. Don't hurt other people. All right, be good.